Ja, herzlich willkommen zu unserem Webinar und schön, dass ihr wieder dabei seid.
Right, welcome to our webinar and happy to see you again at this third session on planetary health, examples and perspectives, and we always keep talking about the transformative aspect of this, and this is why we would like to start now giving you some concrete examples apart from the facts. And I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Dr. Sabine Gabrysch, who, unlike the last two times, she will do the moderation, the facilitation of the other presentations, because going to have two further presentations, and the last one will be in English, so we'll have the questions after the third presentation in English too, so it makes things easier. So right, let's start with our first presentation. We'd like to start introducing you, Sabine, briefly, to just 2 or 3 sentences. You have been a founding member of KLUG, and I mentioned role models and inspiration previously, and you're certainly also a role model and inspiration for us. So the question to you is, what made you, arrive where you've arrived? What has been your history in this context? So passing the floor to you. So thank you very much, Sylvia. It was very easy. At the time, I thought it was very difficult to decide what I would study in the early 90s. I was worried about the injustice in the world, injustice in terms of health chances, but also the destruction of nature and climate change. And unfortunately, planetary health didn't exist as a study course. So I went on to study medicine, hoping to then also make the jump to environmental subjects, which wasn't easy. So I first made an internship with GEZ, malaria control, and then I've been working clinically, and then I discovered that there is such a thing as public health and global health, because those things didn't exist at Tübingen University. And then at the London School of Tropical Medicine, I took my master's degree, and then thought this is really what I want to do. It's about the health of the whole population, it's about living circumstances, the health system, global aspects, the macroscopic view, which I mentioned in the first session. And I thought it was so great at the London School that I added a PhD to it, although I didn't really plan to do that. And then I was looking for a subject which is in the spirit of planetary health, but in 2006 this wasn't really an issue at the London School either. And then I took my PhD in the field of obstetrics in Africa, the mortality of newborns and mothers, and I created the first London EcoHealth Forum. I learned that there is such a thing as eco-health. It was interesting, health from the ecosystem perspective, and I wanted to get to know this closer. After London, I changed back to Germany, to Heidelberg, to the Institute of Global Health as a postdoc, and I started the project which I thought up, which was about fighting malnutrition in infants in Bangladesh. And I came closer to my goal because diet is an interface between human health and the state of the planet, agriculture and so on. And when PIC and Charité created a new professorship for climate change and health in 2010, I applied because this is exactly what I wanted to do, looking after human and planetary health at the same time. And in this time, things started with KLUG and Fridays for Future and Health for Future. And it's very exciting to see that a lot of things are moving in this direction. And I'm very pleased to see so many participants today in the Academy. Thank you very much, Sabine. So this has been a windy road, maybe, and it shows that the road towards the current situation isn't always direct, and hopefully this will be an inspiration for many listeners. So I'm looking forward to your presentation. So I'd like to speak for about 30 minutes, and then there will be about 10 minutes with the examples and perspectives. Planet Earth presenting with a doctor, well, that doesn't really look very good. You have a massive loss of forest and high fever because of greenhouse gases. My diagnosis is you have advanced infestation with Homo sapiens, but the joke goes on to say, don't worry, this is self-limiting. And I'm going to use a lot of metaphors and analogies from medicine, but they are all a bit mixed metaphors, but still maybe they can give some insights to us. So the structure of the presentation is 4 chapters. The first thing is what is planetary health, and then we'll take a look with a medical perspective on planet Earth. So we'll make a patient history, and then we'll have some symptoms, and we'll make a diagnosis and a prognosis, and then we'll also turn to therapies options. In planetary health, the concept is about the health of humans and the natural systems of the planet, on which the human health depends. The idea is age-old. In the 80s and 90s, this term was used in some books and articles. In the last few years, it has gained currency, and this idea is closely linked to other comprehensive health concepts such as One Health, conservation medicine, and eco-health also. The concept is built on public, global health and goes beyond that. So public health looks at the social conditions and measures to protect health in certain populations. Global health looks at health problems and determinants which go beyond country borders and require global cooperation. Planetary health goes beyond the social, economic and also political systems and looks not just at the human-made but also the natural systems of the planet. And the previous concepts, so more local concepts, are still relevant, and they are included in the next higher ranking concept. Like in this Russian doll, local and national action is always included, even if you previously thought about things in global terms. This is the family tree of planetary health based on Frumkin, with different ancestors who all contributed their DNA, basically. In 2014, a very clear visionary manifesto was published in Lancet entitled From Public to Planetary Health, and it finds that human health is under massive threat because of the destruction of the planet. It's a call to action for a new social movement. And let's give me a few quotes from this manifesto, which are also on the website. Quite clear words on overconsumption and unconstrained progress and the system with its injustices. 1 year later, a comprehensive scientific report was published on planetary health, created by the Joint Commission of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet. And then the Planetary Health Alliance was founded, located at the Harvard University, and also of a specialized magazine, the Lancet Planetary Health. The network In Vivo Planetary Health signed the Canmore Declaration in 2018 with the principles for planetary health. It includes emotional togetherness and the immune system, and I do also like to upload this article to the website. And the different groups have come up with different definitions of planetary health. There are also definitions of eco-health and One Health. I don't have the time to elaborate on this, but I'm just showing 3 definitions here on planetary health in the English original. The first one, we saw this in the beginning of the presentation. The second one is more restricted, more anthropocentric, and I'm very pleased with the third definition because there's talk of an interdependent vitality of all natural and human-generated ecosystems. But all of these definitions agree that the methodological approach is not just one discipline, but is transdisciplinary. What does this mean? Well, different disciplines, health sciences, social sciences, natural sciences, philosophy, psychology, and so on, and also local humans contribute their perspectives and bring them together, because that's the only way where the whole entity, this elephant here, can be understood, and the global crisis can be solved. So planetary health is a lot of things, a series of things. It's a research field, it's a political framework, it's a social movement, and much more, and everyone has a different take on the idea of planetary health. The Lancet Commission, Rockefeller Lancet Commission, came up with 3 challenges of planetary health. First is the relationship between human and planet. It has to be rethought, so it's an imagination challenge. Then quantifying the health consequences of global environmental changes. This is a knowledge challenge. And third, developing solution strategies for a sustainable lifestyle and evaluate them. This is the implementation challenge. There is a scientific theory of the 1970s, the Gaia theory, also is closely related to planetary health. It says that the Earth as a whole is a kind of organism, a so-called superorganism with systemic properties, with the ability to self-regulate and to have homeostasis, similar to a beehive, which to a certain extent can keep its temperature stable even though an individual bee is an insect and cannot regulate its body temperature. So this means that humans are part and parcel of a larger organism of planet Earth. So after this definition of planetary health, let's take a look at the patient of the Earth coming to our GP practice. First of all, the patient history, which is a bit of a repeat of the first academy. So what are the symptoms of this Earth? First of all, climate change. The Earth is running a fever, and the weather is becoming more variable, less predictable, more extreme weather events, more heat, more droughts, more fires, as recently in Australia. And because of this global warming, there is a melting of polarized glaciers and permafrost soil. Then we have pollution. There is a pollution in the air through aerosols, plastic and chemicals from water and soil, and also over-fertilization. Then also the loss of biodiversity. Natural ecosystems are changing or are going under. Wild animal stocks are shrinking, and many animals, many species are becoming extinct. Let's take a look at the fever curve again, with these colorful stripes. Blue is below the global mean and red is above the global mean, which has been registered since 1850, as Stefan Ramsdorff said, and there's no statistics needed to show that there is a clear rise in this temperature. This is the curve of the most important greenhouse gas, CO2, over the last 300 years. Before industrialization, the concentration was 280 ppm, now it's above 410. These are the last 10,000 years. The current age or era, the Holocene, which started after the last ice age. In this period, agriculture developed and the civilizations have developed in a very stable climate with a CO2 concentration between 260 and 280 ppm. Now, these are the last 800,000 years, shown during the various ice ages and interglacial periods, and the CO2 concentration was maybe down to 190 in the ice ages and interglacially to 280, and Homo sapiens is only 300,000 years old. So, and here we can see a massive rise in a very short space of time. We have got a CO2 concentration which has never been seen by mankind before. And now for the pollution of air, water and soil. In some cities you cannot see the sun because of the smog, and in this country too the particle concentration is too high. In many places the oceans and the beaches are full of plastic waste, visible and invisible microplastics. Humans have produced tens of thousands of new chemicals, and they don't really know what the effect will be. This is a photo from the Midway film. This is a remote Pacific island, but the chicks of the albatross are dying because they have their belly full of plastic waste. Let's take a look at the skin of a patient Earth. These are a few pictures of various places across the globe. Monocultures of crops such as palm oil, maize and soy threaten natural landscapes. The forests are going under rapidly, and the extinction of species concerns large mammals such as rhinos and primates, but also plants and insects. And even below water there is a reduced biodiversity, there is a coral bleach, and this also entails a reduction in the species living off these corals. The consumption of natural resources, our footprint is rising because there are more people, that's one thing, and the second, the per capita consumption is rising, and there is a multiplication effect. In 1900, there were 1.8 billion people living on Earth with an average BIP of a gross domestic product of $1,100. In 1950, the consumption had doubled, and the number of people had risen to 2.5. 2010, we have 7 billion people with a much higher per capita consumption, with a much bigger footprint. So this was the big acceleration of the last 50 years. And the human influence on the planet is so comprehensive now and so global that geologists have announced a new era, which is replacing Holocene, Anthropocene. It is the age of the humans, and some people suggest it should be called Capitalocene because it's not people who are destroying things, but our economic system. How about human health on the planet itself? We're seeing an increased affluence, prosperity globally, which has reduced, for example, infant mortality and extended the life expectancy. The number of births per woman have reduced to 2.3, so population growth is flattening. But 1 billion people are still living in extreme poverty. 800 million people are suffering from hunger. 5 million kids per day are dying of diseases which would be easy to treat. At the same time, we are having more than 2 billion people who are overweight, and as a consequence, diabetes and cardiovascular diseases are rising rapidly, also psychological diseases. Next chapter, we've looked at the patient history, we've examined the patient, and now we'll try to come up with a diagnosis and check to what extent these findings deviate from a healthy condition. And in this respect, the planetary boundaries concept helps us, which was mentioned by Stefan. So as in this waterfall, it is wise to not go right to the edge of the waterfall. And for scientists, for different Earth systems, scientists have defined some boundaries as the diagnostic parameters in medicine, which show to the extent to which certain bodily functions are deviating. And we have exceeded some of these boundaries already, for example, for extinction of species. And when it comes to land use, for example, and climate, we're in the business of doing this now. And it's important to understand that many things in bodies and nature are not linear. First of all, the system will buffer the disruption and there will be no problem. But once a certain point has been exceeded, then the whole system will tilt, as in a pencil. And sometimes it's a domino system, and the next system will fall with it. And one example of this tipping point is the Greenland ice, which is melting, but the thinner it becomes, it is exposed to hotter air from lower altitudes, and at some point it will melt quickly, and this will then long-term introduce a 7 meters rise in the sea levels. And this brings us to the prognosis. So what are the possible consequences? At 1.5 degrees global heating, global warming, the consequences are serious, but with some effort and good luck, they can be manageable. At 2 degrees, the chances are much worse, and with 3 degrees or 4 degrees, the damage rises massively, and it's not possible for human civilization to adapt to these conditions of a hot age. Is very unlikely. And this is why the central goal of the Paris Agreement is to reduce global warming to far below 2 degrees, if possible to 1.5 degrees, and for this to happen, the emission of greenhouse gases have to be zero after 2050. If all the promises of the countries would be kept, were kept, then what would we have? Would still have a global heating of 3 degrees. So there is a Paris Agreement, but the promises, the commitments we've been given so far by the countries is not enough. So what does this mean? Earth has seen many extinctions. For example, last time, 60 million years ago, when the dinosaurs became extinct. The planet will survive, but it's about the animals living now, corals, chimpanzees, plants, animals, fungi, and especially about us humans, about our survival, our well-being, our civilizatory achievements, the maintenance of peace and freedom, and with a population of 7.8 billion, many of whom living in coastal areas, all of them have to be fed and watered. And we are damaging ourselves, our children and the future generations. And this brings us to one of the 3 challenges of planetary health. If we destabilize the Earth system, how will this affect our health? This was last week's topic. It's important to understand that the consequences of global environmental change to health are mediated by social dynamics, the mediating factors. In the best case, this will be reduced because of successful adaptation. And in the worst case, they are amplified because of conflicts for local resources. And what's become very bad if several factors happen at the same time, because adaptation then is compromised. You can see divide the consequences in direct and indirect ones. Direct consequences are the consequences of environmental events such as storms, floodings, droughts, and heat waves. The indirect consequences are increased transmission of disease. Mosquitoes, ticks migrate to new areas, or for example droughts, famines, migration movements, refugee movements because of a rise of sea levels, for example, and psychological consequences. States can be destabilized, there can be warring conflicts which in turn will have negative consequences on health. This shows the about 7 billion people globally, 1 billion in extreme poverty, 1 billion in very high wealth, and the rest is in the middle. And this increase in prosperity on this development path of the last few decades was accompanied by a massive rise in the consumption of resources and the ecological footprint. So it was at the cost of the planet. And there was some delay with the repercussions via global environmental changes, climate change, extinction, and it threatens our livelihoods and our health. And it's the poorest who are the first to suffer and suffer most because they are at the limit of their livelihoods and they have no protective mechanisms, although they don't really contribute to the problem, which is very unjust, but it hits us all, basically. So the situation is serious. If we don't take action, there is risk of death. So a kind of planetary emergency. How will a good doctor communicate serious diagnosis? He or she will tell the full story, helps the patient to accept the new situation, make sure that the priorities in life changes completely. Because if the patient misunderstands or doesn't fully understand the doctor's diagnosis, then it is very difficult to discuss the treatment, the therapy. As in this cartoon, in this climatic debate, we still have the situation like in this cartoon. Now for therapy. As in medicine, there are short, medium and long-term measures. The emergency doctor at the scene of the accident will first of all stabilize the situation. So we should not have non-sustainable subsidies for air transport, coal, meat and so on, not building new coal-fired power plants, stopping deforestation, stopping the pollution, the contamination of soil. According to the German Agency for the Environment, 57 billion euros of environmental damaging subsidies are distributed, which is not in line with the first principle of Hippocrates, do not do damage. So long term we have various challenges, reducing climate change and reducing poverty, because this is what we have to achieve: good health for everyone, and at the same time keeping the footprint small. That's what's meant by sustainable. In order to plan therapy, we need to know what is the remaining CO2 budget. So how much, many greenhouse gases, which amount can we emit before we will go above the planetary boundaries. Under the Paris Agreement, we want to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees. And according to the report by the IPCC in 2018, this will mean that we are allowed to emit 420 gigatons, which is 66% of all the models predict that. But the average global emission is 42 gigatons. So in the May of 2020, we have about 320 gigatons left. So this means we have to become clean as quickly as possible. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. So we only have a contingency or quota of 420 gigatons in 2018 figures. At the same time, we have to introduce withdrawal. So we have to pace ourselves. If we waste too much, then it's going to be difficult to reach the goal, and we also have to be fair. The 420 gigatons are global. Who is going to be allowed to emit how much? Because at the same time we want to fight poverty. Stefan showed these reduction paths. I'm not going to elaborate them more. I would like to ask you to play for yourselves with nuts or chocolates in an old box of chocolates. It's very interesting. I would like to put the instructions on the website. So here we have 42 coffee beans, representing these 42 gigatons of CO2 equivalents, which we are emitting globally every year. I'll show the distribution over the global population, divided into 10 equal groups in terms of poverty or wealth, from the poorest to the richest. And the first half of humanity emits only a tenth of the total quantity, 4 beans, and the richest 10% are emitting half of them, 21 beans. So the obvious question is, where should we start reducing? This is the calculation per person and country. In Germany, the average emission is 9 tons per person and year, twice as much as the global average. In the climate debate, the justice aspect is always included. Who has caused the problem? Who is able to invest in conversion? Who is fighting for their survival? Anyway, who has got a high living standard and luxury, and where do millions of people want to achieve life worth living? Obviously, the richest country have to reduce more quickly and help the other countries. In order to achieve that, small steps will not be enough. We need a radical change of our society, so a great transformation of society, which is an unprecedented challenge. Are we going to take the corner? And for this to happen, we need to rethink, because the current pattern of thinking which has caused the problem will not solve the problem, as Einstein was wise to understand. And this brings us to the core of the problem, the relationship between humans and the planet. We have to understand that humans are one component of a very complex network of life on this planet, that our health, our society, our economy are based on a healthy nature, on a stable climate, for example. And this also has an ethical dimension. What is the value we give to nature? Is our relationship determined by exploitation or by awe and a feeling of togetherness? Albert Schweitzer's ethics of awe for life is the attempt to overcome our short-sighted ethics, which only looks at humans and regards the rest of the planet as a resource for wasteful use. It is a comprehensive ethics which gives a value to every organism. The encyclical Laudato Si by Pope Francis talks about the concern for the joint common house, planet Earth. He says we should be in awe for the miracles of nature, by contrast with the idea of being the ruler or consumer. Dalai Lama always highlights compassion is a necessity for the survival of human life. And these findings, of course, are not new. Neither is the concept of planetary health. Many native civilizations have kept this wisdom for generations, the spiritual relationship with nature, with Mother Earth, if their culture has not been made extinct by us. Basically, it also boils down to how image of the human, because that colors our behavior. Is man greedy, selfish, and only thinking about their own advantage? It's a homo economicus. Or it could be a generous person, compassionate person, a just person. But humans are not either or. Both characters are present, and in each person these two wolves from the fable are fighting each other, greed against generosity, arrogance against modesty, competition against cooperation, and the question as to which wolf will survive, well, it depends on which wolf we feed. And here it's about society. How do we grow up? How do we live? If everything is about greed and self-image, are other values more important? So what kind of concrete solutions are there for a sustainable lifestyle? The footprint is well known. Everyone can calculate the strain she puts on the planet using computers and websites. But that's not enough. We have to also change structures, and we have to take political influence. We have to contribute to the great transformation. That's our handprint. An example of footprint is taking the train, and handprint, well, making sure that the train is the better and the cheaper option. And for this to happen, we have to change the rules of the game. We have to influence structures politically. That's where the levers are biggest. As carbon tax is one example. But at the middle levels, we can also make a change. For example, in communities, in companies and schools and hospitals. For example, there is a bundle of many solutions. Most of them are still in niches. Many solutions use synergies, such as win-win solutions, things which are good for the climate and good for health. For example, in transport. In Europe, it's responsible for a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions and is the main source of particles. At the same time, lack of exercise, accidents and air pollution are huge health risks. So changing the transport situation in favor of cities made for bicycles would protect the health and the climate. Agriculture is responsible for another quarter of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and for deforestation, soil degradation and extinction. And if we cultivate our food differently with methods using nature as a role model, this is good for climate, for biodiversity and for our diets and health, because unhealthy diets are one of the most important risk factors for disease and premature death. The Lancet Commission has come up with recommendations for a planetary health diet, which are healthy and sustainable. But in Germany, the average plate looks like this. Eating less meat and more vegetables would be a huge benefit for humans. And the Lancet Commission comes up with two important messages summarizing everything. First, climate change is the biggest threat for global health in the 21st century because it destroys our livelihoods on the planet, extreme events, hunger, famine, migration. So a collapse of society is on the cards. And the second principle is that overcoming climate change could be the biggest opportunity for global health in the 21st century, because what we are doing for climate protection is exactly the same thing which we need to do for global health. So it's a win-win situation. Air pollution, transport, diets, all these are good examples. So how can we as doctors or public health professionals contribute? In the later events of the Academy, there will be more examples, so I'd like to just give you a few. First of all, we can be the advocates for planetary health, and we contribute our expertise into political and social debates. Then we can try and reduce our professional footprint ourselves, and making sure that doctors, pension schemes disinvest from fossil fuels. In our own practices, for example, we can support adaptation to climate change, for example, heat adaptation plans, and in our practice we can also focus more on win-win situations, so climate change and climate protection rather and health are connected. And there are solutions both in Germany and internationally, and we should develop that, and that's where I see my role. And we can make a contribution that the contents are also put into the curriculum, not just the contents but also the transformative action aspect, something which we are doing together. So this deep social change we need will not happen automatically. We need social mobilization because there are massive interests counteracting this. It is not about facts only, it's also about power. And we have lots of experience, for example, with the tobacco industry. And when it comes to the transformation for a sustainable society, the resistance of the profiteers of the state can be expected. As Gandhi said, first of all, they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they worry, and then you win. So we are advocates for the majority of people and for the weak people, and we don't have 30 years as in smoking, but together we are strong. We can achieve the positive vision of a healthier and more sustainable world, and some good examples already exist. And achieving this great transformation in a short period of time, there is no blueprint for that. We have to try and fail, and we have to learn, and this will develop a huge dynamics. Enthusiasm and fun, of course, are important factors. Thank you very much. Next up, we'll have Niken Grützmacher from the Wildlife Conservation Society, and we've met in July 2018, I think, at the Planetary Health Conference in Edinburgh, and both of us have gone forward to the speakers and wanted to ask him something, and then we walked up to Arthur's seat and we did lots of things together. Maybe you can tell us something about what brought you on to do these things. Well, thank you very much, Sabine, and thank you very much to the organizers at this point. It's a great initiative. Well, this meeting with Sabine had determined my life to some extent and changed it. It's been very inspiring, and everything we've been doing together. So this has really made me develop. My personal history is similar to yours in some respects, because I also studied human medicine, although I'm now a vet, because before my studies I was working on a whale research ship. So I was there on board for 7 months, and we looked at the exposure of the seas to human poisons, and we have examined some whales to find out how the environmental toxins accumulate in the food chain, and it was fascinating to see to me that pesticides which we spread to our fields in Germany then are passed into the oceans via the waterways, and then they work up their way in the food chain and then end up on the plate of some Japanese child, and there will be some consequences for all kinds of organisms along this course. And I thought, that's interesting. I'm studying medicine, and I'm noting this down, and things will change, hopefully. And we've heard yesterday that this will not simply work as simply as that, just to move into science, and then this will change. We need some initiatives to bring about change and transformation. And of course you have to communicate with politics also. So anyway, I studied medicine. I was very sorry that environmental medicine has nothing to do with the natural environment. So I went back to the ship in my semester breaks, and I got to know a vet who now has taken over the research program, and she told me there is a thing such as conservation medicine, which I thought was fascinating. So I switched over to veterinary medicine, and ever since I've been working at various stations for animals, national parks, zoos, working there. And then, once I was clinically active as a vet, I did a PhD study in biomedicine, and for 3 years I went to the RKI, the Robert Koch Institute, on the subject of zoonosis, for example. I'll come back to that. Then I moved on to the epidemiology of pathogens, and then I went to the Public Health Institute. And this is really where we came full circles with human medicine. So this is my history. And now I'm working with a conservation agency which has its own health program and has been around for 100 years. This agency, I'm working with fantastic colleagues at this interface, really, between the environment and health. So we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much. Well, let's get started. Sabine has talked extensively about what planetary health is. Well, briefly it describes the state of health of human civilization and the environment on which it depends. I would like to talk about 2 points: the effects of the change of land use, destruction of habitats, destruction of ecosystems, and also including trade in wild animals, the risk of the rise of epidemics and maybe also pandemics. And the second point is the synergies between the protection of nature, species, climate change, and health. So it also concerns pandemics, for example. Zoonoses. Well, I would like to talk about these zoonoses for some time, about infectious diseases which spread from animals to humans. 2/3 of the infectious diseases come from animals, of them 70% from wild animals. Some examples are SARS coronavirus 1, MERS coronavirus, Ebola, HIV, bird flu. There are many examples, and now also SARS coronavirus 2. On this graph you see the various coronaviruses and the original reservoirs, and possibly also the intermediate hosts. If you are familiar with this topic, then you may not have been surprised by the current pandemic. We've known all along it's a question of time until a virus spreads from an animal to humans, leading to epidemics and pandemics. And this graph talks about the different coronaviruses. Sometimes their origins are known, sometimes they aren't. For COVID-19, there are very relatively closely related viruses in bats, and we can assume that these viruses were the antecedents of SARS-CoV COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, and it's not quite fully understood, this mechanism. Something I would like to add is that there are roughly 700,000 viruses in birds and mammals which have the potential to jump over to humans, and regularly there are these so-called spillovers, so that the fact that this virus crosses the species boundary, it's not just viruses, but let's talk about viruses first. So they spill over to humans, but whether there is a breakout or outbreak rather depends on different factors such as human behavior, population density, how closely do people live with each other, how do they behave, and with the increase in human population plus increasing mobility, there is a higher risk now that these outbreaks expand and lead up to pandemics, to full-blown pandemics. So let's return to how come that we are in contact with wild animals. How does it work? So where are the points where we maybe can control and can repair things? For example, on markets for wild animals, as you can see on these pictures, there are illegally traded animals, but the virus really doesn't care about legality. What the virus needs is a chance to spread and to skip species boundaries, and this is possible at these marketplaces where different species are put together in one space, one spot. They are put under stress, which has an effect on their immune system, on the excretion of viruses, and so they come in contact with the excretions and blood of other species, and especially where there are freshly slaughtered animals coming into contact with people. So these are very dangerous interfaces, contact points where this spillover is more likely than elsewhere. There may be some other factors at play, and then you get the effect which we are seeing now with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. And these viruses spread not just at these marketplaces, but they may also spill over at other points of contact we may have with wild animals. People penetrate natural habitats more and more. Forests are cleared, moors are dried and drained, and grassland is converted, sometimes for the purposes of agriculture, sometimes in order to build villages, cities, and industry. This changing land use always precedes zoonoses. By these conversions, new contact points are created along the new interfaces between habitats. Contacts with humans, but also with their farm animals, and sometimes this intermediate hosts are also farm animals. It may also happen in the places where we live, where we come into contact with wild animals. This also extends to the traded exotic animals, for example, but also along changing landscapes. Sometimes there are wild animals which can adapt to humans much better, so new coexistences with wild animals can occur, can develop, those animals which adapt well to humans. And I'm showing the directions of transmission and the link between nature, humans, and the environment are also picked up in the One Health concept, and it's similar to Planetary Health in that it is interdisciplinary. Our environmental minister, Sylvia, has picked up on this idea in April. Of course, we were very, very pleased about this, and we can only welcome this fact. And she's also been supported scientifically by some of our members in this effort also, which I find very pleasing. So what does this mean for species protection, for biodiversity? As Professor Zettele mentioned in the first session, our biodiversity is under threat. The IPBES biodiversity report says that the speed of change in nature has been unprecedented in the last 50 years for the history of mankind. The direct causes of that, with the biggest global effects, are number one, changes of land and ocean use, but also the destruction of habitats, but also the direct exploitation of organisms, for example, poaching and the trade in wild animals. Both things increase the risk of pandemics. Right, and this process, biodiversity makes a big contribution to fighting climate change. Intact forests can extract large quantities of carbon and store them, but as in this case, shown in this case, the animals are taken out of this environment, then the composition of the vegetation will change. Big trees storing lots of carbon sometimes rely on big animals spreading their seeds. That's just one example of how biodiversity work can help climate change work. So one contribution could come from nature. So we've seen the main causes for the loss of biodiversity also are the causes for pandemics, and the protection of biodiversity can contribute to health protection, which goes far beyond the reduction of pandemic risks, but also contribute to the fight against climate change. So we have a win-win-win situation. So we advocate to protect habitats, especially the remaining intact forests and other functioning ecosystems. We advocate reducing contacts between humans and wild animals because of the management of conservation areas, the closure of commercial wild animal markets for human consumption, especially for birds and mammals, especially the closure of markets where there is a close contact, and especially with excretions, contact with meat and blood and so on. The struggle against illegal wild animal trade, which is much more difficult to control, of course. Identification of pathogens, monitoring hotspots with a high biodiversity and high socioeconomic change, especially increasing contacts between humans and wild animals. We recommend a better research into wild animal health, education of local populations, supporting people who rely on wild animals as a source of food, safe handling of wild animals, and finding alternatives to this trade in wild animals. So much for my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're talking in English from now on, so that Renzo can actually participate. Sorry for all the German so far. So it's a pleasure that you're joining us today from the Philippines.
Geschehen. Guten Tag, meine Freunde. That's the limited German that I know.
We got in touch. You got in touch with me last year before the World Health Summit in Berlin, because you were in Europe and going to Germany. And then I had the idea that you may be interested to attend an event that Kim organized with the Foreign Office called One Health, One Planet, One Future. And then we met there and at the World Health Summit and at some other talks. And it was very nice to see your energy for the cause of planetary health. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Like, maybe you can tell us also in the beginning a little bit your story of how you ended up becoming a chief planetary doctor.
Thank you again, Sabine. And I'm really thrilled to be part of this Planetary Health Academy in Germany. You're actually giving me ideas. We want to replicate this here in Southeast Asia, where, we're also building our own regional community around planetary health. And, just very briefly, even as early as, back in medical school days, I've been very involved in environmental initiatives. When I learned firsthand about climate change, I thought it's really the grandest challenge in public health that we future doctors will be facing. And so since then, that has been forever etched in my mind, that we need to be, doctors for the future, not just for our patients, but also for the planet. And, fast forward, I've been involved in so many different initiatives, both locally and internationally. I just finished my doctorate at Harvard. I focus on, climate change and how health systems in the Philippines are preparing for the long-term health impacts. And then now I'm back in the country. Thankfully, I made it back before the lockdowns have occurred. Otherwise, I would have been stranded in the US. And now I'm back in the Philippines building my, startup organization that hopes to really address planetary health challenges head on, especially in low and middle income countries. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
Okay, over to you. Then you can share your slides and tell us a little
Awesome.
bit.
Great. So you can see my slides now.
Yes.
Awesome. So for the next 10 minutes, I'll just be giving some perspectives and experiences from the Philippines, where I come from, around this very, important theme, topic, framework, concept, paradigm of planetary health. And, I already mentioned this a while ago, really for me as a physician, and I believe in our, I'm so amazed. You have 1,300 participants from across Germany. I believe many of you are health professionals, doctors, young physicians, other healthcare providers. I hope to inspire you that me personally, I really see this as having not just people, but the planet as well as my patients. We really cannot continue improving people's health in the medical care system while ignoring and turning a blind eye towards the planet, the ecological crisis that really, endangers health in the long run. And I think Sabine and also Kim eloquently discussed to you many of these planetary health challenges that eventually afflict people's health in many parts of the world. And, I did not mention yet a while ago the name of my startup. It's called PH Lab. And it's, representing or characterized by these three dichotomies. It's global, global in perspective, but local in impact. Think and do tank. We have so many organizations that do a lot of the thinking, they're called think tanks, but we want to make sure that we deliver results and in communities around the world that really are affected by these problems. And then it's not just for people, it's for planet too. Again, this integrated vision of planetary health, and that's why it's PH. But also PH stands for the Philippines. That's the nickname of my country. In Germany, I believe it's DE, right? But PH is also public health. That we already know. And of course, planetary health. And this is really my theory of change. I love it, Sabine, you mentioned a while ago, diagnosis. And I think if we adopt this clinical approach, we start with a very good diagnosis, analysis of the problems from a transdisciplinary perspective, and then we lead to designing of solutions, whether they're new technologies or policies or specific interventions. And then we make sure they're being delivered to places there where these solutions are needed. Then we can make a whole huge difference, not just in Philippine health, not just in public health, but ultimately for planetary health. And this is really my dream. And, I just came from the US and, Silicon Valley, which is the epicenter of technological innovation. My dream for the Philippines is to be the Silicon Islands of planetary health. And the Philippines has 7,000 islands. And so you can just imagine, it's a whole space for innovation on how we can really advance human health while protecting the Earth's health. And, I really love this play of, letters and words. PH, Philippines, Planetary Health, the Philippines at the heart of planetary health. And it's, not just because we are really a hotspot of these many problems, climate change, natural disasters, tropical diseases, etc. But also the Philippines, I believe, as I already insinuated a while ago, can be a testbed and a source of innovative ideas that we can also share to other places around the world. So here you will see in the map, this is Southeast Asia. If you haven't visited yet Southeast Asia, please make it at the top of your bucket list after the lockdowns have been lifted and the travel bans have been lifted. But as you can see, my country, the Philippines, it's in red in this map. And the redder the country is, the higher its vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. So the region at large is vulnerable, but the Philippines in particular is highly, if not the most vulnerable in the region. And here you will see, typhoons, natural disasters. Probably you've seen that in the news over the past, over the past years. We've been frequented by 20 typhoons annually coming from the Pacific. But with climate change, we have seen typhoons becoming much more severe, more in number, greater in number, and even more unpredictable. And here you see what happens when these natural calamities, climate-induced extreme weather events do occur. It's not just, agricultural systems or educational systems or livelihood that are really affected. Even healthcare systems are being disrupted. Health professionals become victims themselves. And natural disasters, climate-related effects do generate a lot of health impacts. And here, indeed, in the national newspaper, the following day after Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest typhoon to hit land in human history, that happened in 2013, on the day after, it has been described as the worst disaster to hit PH, which, as you know, the Philippines, public health, but also the planet's health. And here in my doctoral thesis, I really unpack, what are these health impacts? And I'll not belabor you with the details, but as you can see, there are many different pathways that link climate change to a lot of these modulators, social, environmental, the health system, which ultimately lead to a wide range of health impacts, both, the current and known, which we know will be aggravated and exacerbated, but also there are new challenges that we are anticipating to happen. For example, the Philippines now is facing the fastest rate of sea level rise among the countries of the world because of our exposure to the Pacific. And we know that, and there's growing evidence that with sea level rise, seawater intrudes fresh water, people in coastal communities drink highly salinized water, which leads to diverse health effects like hypertension, preeclampsia for pregnant mothers, and even kidney stones. And this is something that I want to investigate in the coming years here in the Philippines. And so really my question, and this is how I combine my work as a physician and public health professional and as a planetary health scholar and advocate, are we ready to build health systems that consider the climate? As you can see in the picture, I'm talking to communities that are already affected by sea level rise that basically lead to displacements and other health, agricultural, and other impacts. And I just want to invoke Anthony McMichael, who was a climate and health pioneer from Australia, one of the first to really frame climate change as a public health issue. He urges us to lift our gaze to bigger ecological horizons, and that means a radical extension of the public health agenda, which I think is planetary health, new forms of professional training, not just in environmental health, but in all health professions, a preparedness to base policy advice upon predictions and best guesses, and an ability to collaborate with unfamiliar disciplines such as climatology and ecology. And perhaps we are, not really taught on how to talk to meteorologists and environmentalists. So this is really the opportunity that we have in this era of planetary health. And then, in my work, I've been going to a lot of coastal municipalities, really unpacking, the problems that they're facing, but also the solutions that they're already doing to adapt to these changes. And I'm also combining actually my passion for the humanities. So, my doctoral thesis, it's 200 pages long, but I turned it into films as well. And I invite you to view them. They're definitely much easier to watch than reading a 200-page dissertation. And I believe our team from the Planetary Health Academy will share with you the links to the films. And really, ultimately, I think the vision for planetary health-oriented health systems, that's how I'm actually describing it. They're universal, accessible to everyone, high value, high quality, and affordable and responsive, but also climate smart. And climate smart is a term that means systems that are both adaptive to the effects of climate change, but also low carbon, because we don't want health systems to be accomplice to the crime. We don't want health systems to be emitting carbon using fossil fuel driven electricity. And finally, I think because of COVID-19, I will be remiss to not mention it, we need health systems to be pandemic resistant as well. And that also speaks to Kim's agenda around, early detection of zoonosis, for example, as we interact closely with wildlife and impinge on natural ecosystems. And then, I really appreciate that the Planetary Health Academy is now launched, and we need to replicate this around the world because there's really need for planetary health education. And I can already see bits and pieces of these elements. I'll not go into detail in your curriculum. And really, we can just imagine how the future doctors and nurses and health professionals will look like if they're educated with a planetary health mindset. And then this is also what I'm developing now. I think there's a lot of conversation about planetary health research, generating the evidence, linking, weather with health outcomes, biodiversity, etc. But I think we need to start thinking about how do we incorporate it in practice? How do we institutionalize them in governance? How do we integrate different agendas? Where do we find the investments for planetary health solutions? How do we manage and integrate, scattered information about climate and mosquitoes and, human health outcomes? How do we tap on innovation to really find the solutions for the future? Implementation, how do we make implementation better and more effective? And definitely, ultimately, inspiration or instigation. How do we spread the positive virus of planetary health to the world? And finally, this is what I've been thinking a lot as well. How do we reimagine the political economy of planetary health? We can discuss a lot about the symptoms, from emerging infections to climate change and its health effects. But if we don't tackle really what is the underlying economic and political structures that perpetuates these planetary health problems, then we will be just repeating the same mistake again, treating the symptoms without eradicating the ultimate cause, the etiology of illness. So it's time to flatten the curve, not just of COVID-19, but the curve of our emissions, our ecological footprint, because we don't want to exceed the Earth's capacity. We don't want to violate the planetary boundaries that Sabine already described to you a while ago. Because if we don't do that, then, a lot of countries have been talking already about when is the second wave of COVID-19 going to happen. I think there is a much bigger and much scarier wave that is about to happen if we don't do our act now. So I hope that we together work towards advancing the health of both people and planet. Thank you again. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Renzo. So, Sylvia, how should we continue now? Because it's a little bit behind time.
We're a little bit behind time, that's true. I just want to thank you as well again. And I think because the three of you showed how important actually relationships are, because you all explained like how you inspired each other. And I just can stress another time that our main aim as well was to bring you into action. And therefore, we also want to bring you into these local groups where you can reflect and discuss with other people about everything you heard. And I'm really glad that you shared your personal stories as well, because I think it's really important not only to learn facts, but also to understand that not everything is as easy as it sometimes might seem from the outside. So thank you very much. I don't know, Martin, maybe do you have a question?
Renzo, thank you very much for staying with us from the Global South, because I think that's one of the visions I have, that the movement is much more connected between the developing countries and the countries here in the Global North. So what is your idea about bringing something similar to what we are doing into the East Asian countries?
Right. Well, thank you, Martin, for that question. As I've said, right now we are in the birthing pains of building a community in Southeast Asia, from Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. And I informed them about, this academy that I'm participating in. And they are just so thrilled to, replicate the model. And maybe that's a conversation that we can have. But for sure, I think, as we bring Planetary Health to other places, outside of Europe and North America, we will need to make sure that, even the stories of people and organizations from those places, the knowledge that is already existing in these places, are also being reflected in the curricula. And that's why I appreciate as well that I'm with you to share at least some perspective from, the other, side of the world. And in that kind of intercultural and regional conversation, I think we realize that we have much more in common than, different. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we can take first questions. Lisa, do we already have some?
Yes, we have a lot. So one question that just came in, and I think that's something that many people that are active in the environmental field, they get confronted with this question a lot. And all of you talked about conferences and faraway travels, and if you want to get there, you need to be on a train. So how can we get that on the same level? Shouldn't we be like role models for everyone? I know this is a common thing that happens.
Well, that's a very good question. I was also thinking of it when Renzo mentioned, let's all come and visit Southeast Asia. Because actually we had a conversation about this once, I don't know, where you said that you only came to the World Health Summit because you were in Amsterdam during that time. And then you said, okay, while I'm in Europe, I will take advantage and visit all the European places that I can do by train. And I'm kind of trying to do the same. So I'm traveling as little as possible. I was not in Bangladesh that many times, as you may think, having a project there. So I tried to only travel when it's really essential that I'm there. I worked a lot with the local group. And the one time I went last time was also a conference in Nepal. And inside Europe, wherever you can go by train, I'm going by train. If it's like this 1,000, what is it called? This 1,000 kilometers? No, not 1,000. Remember, like you can do it in a reasonable time. Yeah. I know you want to add something? Okay, more Renzo?
Actually, I want to add something to it, because I think, as Renzo was saying, what we're trying to do here is probably the biggest lab of this kind that the planet has seen. Yeah. So, and I hope that from it we also learn new ways of how to educate ourselves. Also, we are in very different parts of the world without traveling. Now, I would also say there is some need to in between see each other and work together in other ways. But I think we can find ways that this can happen much less than we thought. And so that's one of the things why we also need you to learn together. What does it take to take the learning from the sessions into reflections, into action, which is really what we're trying to do now in the next lectures, to move into examples of transformative learning, of transformative action in many ways. But I hope that together we learn other ways of doing these things so that we can be much more selective in when we travel. And then when we travel, it has a much higher impact.
Right. Can I just add about this travel issue? And I've been involved in so many discussions as well around this. And coming from a country with 7,000 islands, even within a country, sometimes the most efficient and the only available mode of transport is flying. And so I think on one hand, there is a personal level responsibility that we especially the enlightened ones, have to consider, being more judicious in deciding which conferences to attend. Or as Sabine already shared with you, that because I was already in Europe for like 3 months, I took advantage and basically did the Planetary Health lecture tour in around 10 countries, without even flying, because, your transport system is very, efficient. But also on the other hand, I think there are structural, systematic challenges that need to be addressed. For example, the limitation in, mobility options, especially in regions outside of Europe and North America, where we can't ask people to just say, take the train, when it's not even existing. So, this is like an entire issue that still needs to be looked into. And maybe after COVID-19, we can build the infrastructure for travel that is low carbon, but is also equitable.
So one question was also, how can we put pressure on politicians to work toward the great transformation, like you just described?
I mean, I can say something because I'm invited actually tomorrow to talk to a German group of parliamentarians. And the interesting thing is that these invitations are occurring much more in the last weeks. So it is happening. And I think we still have to see how do we get in meaningful and deep conversations. Because it's not enough to ask them questions or say what they should do. It's really about building relationships where we can be jointly looking at what does it mean and how can we deal with the inherent conflicts and tensions that arise when we really move forward with the transformational agenda. Because that's not an easy thing. And now we're in the middle of the crisis, but also when you drive transformation, you even induce some crises that are already there to come up. So I do believe, when we use the change agent concept that if we reach, for example, 2 or 3% of the politicians to have meaningful relationships and meaningful conversations over a longer period of times, that this can cause a miracle and a change in perspective also in the political arena. So, but the interest is very much there, and in the preparatory talk for my conversation tomorrow, it was clear that also in the political arena, people are very much siloed, and so what we can bring with the Planetary Health agenda is a much broader perspective. And from the broader perspective, it's easier to kind of come to set priorities and also come to narratives that you then that politicians can use when they talk to their audiences and to the citizens in their local communities and so on and so forth. So that's my sense. Any other?
Yeah, may I add? So I really like what you said, Martin, because I think, so yes, of course, on a, let's say, broad societal level, of course, as a society, we could add pressure and probably should do everything at once anyway. But I also really like just supporting the right politicians, the right parties, the right actions, and being supportive of the ones who want to do the right thing already. So and I've encountered incredible people in government who are, very willing to do the right thing, who are highly interested in finding the right solutions. And so I think it's not just about putting pressure, but it's also giving the right support.
They even ask for pressure. Like, remember at this Foreign Office event when I challenged the Staatssekretär, then he was like, yeah, but we're afraid of like popular, what do you say, like discontent with our policies, and it kind of depends who's more on the streets as well. Is it the sort of right-wing people, or is it the more progressive climate change movement? So clearly the politicians are watching what's the pressure also in the population, and then like we're trying to have conversations with people who are already willing and trying to forge links, but also pushing them and challenging them.
I can also add that we are going to hear a little bit more about it next time, because next session is going to be specifically on transformation. And we're also going to have Martin, you just heard him, and then we're also going to have someone who's especially doing research on social tipping points. And also Luisa Neubauer, you probably know her, who is one of the founders of Fridays for Future. So we'll do some advertisement in advance already.
Can I just add something, because I'll not be in the future session? You know, I think even before we talk about how do we influence politics, I think we as individuals, we need to reflect first within ourselves. Are we ready to talk to a politician, right? And I always have this 3S framework. You know, when I talk to a politician, you start with a story, because that is what will evoke emotion and that will catch their interest. You tell them the science. You know, they always say they want their policies to be evidence-based. Give them some science, don't overwhelm them. But number 3, you have to end with the solution, because, you know, you can present a brilliant analysis, but when you're being asked, so what is the policy advice, the exact solution that I have to implement? And, you know, you get caught off guard because you don't have anything prepared in concrete, then you don't, you know, create a relationship and bring it to the next level towards making change. Thanks.
Yeah, I can ask some more questions. So in this seminar and in this whole series, we see that transdisciplinary work is very important. And what other discipline would you like to see more in the field of planetary health in the future? Who do you feel is still sort of missing for the big picture?
Yeah, the social sciences. The social sciences. And, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this. As I've said, I've been involved in the planetary health, the young planetary health community. And unfortunately, it's still very much dominated by doctors like me and Sabine and epidemiologists and some sprinkling of veterinarians and other natural scientists. But we know that the solutions to planetary health problems are not so much technical, but really political and economic. And that is one, and cultural. You know, we talk about shifting to planetary health diet. It's not about planting the right, you know, vegetables. It's about changing cultures of eating that have been embedded for millennia. So how do you change that? And so we need the social scientists, we need the communicators, we need the, you know, the marketing people. You know, they're so good in marketing, you know, unhealthy diets and products. We need to be smarter than them.
Sabine, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I think it's also like this, we had this discussion in the beginning where the different fields came from. So the One Health, the Eco Health, Planetary Health, etc. And I guess it's always reflected in who are the majority of people in there. So the Planetary Health came off from the public health community. And in the Eco Health field, there's more ecologists. In the One Health field, there's lots of veterinarians. And in the end, we need them all to be together in one movement. And it doesn't actually matter what it's called, really. So the idea is the same, and every community has to try and reach out to the others and see where is the common ground and what can we do together. And for planetary health, clearly we've now started by mobilizing the health professions, and I think that's very important because they were largely in their biomedical worldview still, and we need them. But now that we've woken up to this, what indigenous people have known forever, so we should also like reach out to all the both the natural sciences but also social sciences, etc. And I think it's also cool that in this academy that's what you're doing. Like next week is Ilona Otto is talking, like she's clearly on this side of things. So.
Perhaps one more point about the transdisciplinary question. Because as Sabine has mentioned, we have these 3 dimensions of challenges. One is the knowledge challenge, then the imagination challenge, and the implementation challenge. And most disciplines are most comfortable with the knowledge challenge. So that's normally the place where they meet. So there would be a danger that we have fantastic conferences where we exchange our knowledge, but don't have really bold imaginations and don't have great ideas of how to implement things. So I really think the challenge is not only to be transdisciplinary, but be transdisciplinary in transformative action. in visionary imaginations of how we could consider life to be in a different way, how we could cooperate in a different way. And I think that's a challenge also for the transdisciplinary work. And I've been sharing that with Sabine and also with Kim, that even today, planetary health is mostly focused around the knowledge challenge. And there are not so many articles focusing on the other work. So that's why we also intentionally designed this planetary health series in a way that especially the later ones are focusing on the imagination and the implementation action challenge.
And actually, when you do implementation, like I've seen that with my project in Bangladesh, the interdisciplinarity comes very natural, because you need people who know about behavior change, you need people who know about culture, you need people who know about suddenly arsenic in the groundwater or some totally different thing that you've been working on. So, and I think if we start like doing this, and you have, like, I like this do tank thing. So then you'll immediately have to have all these people. And while we're doing things, again, we need to not just do it, but also evaluate it and find out what works, what doesn't work, how can we scale it up, how can we transfer it somewhere else. And this implementation research is something that I think needs a lot more attention, and that's where I kind of want to focus my efforts, in fact.
Okay, so maybe one last question that each of you can answer. So when we see all these graphs and we hear about the big transformation and so much change that has to come, but it will be difficult to start the change, what makes you hopeful for the future?
So, I mean, initiatives like this year make me really hopeful. What I've seen over the last couple of years, I mean, frankly, before that, I was still more or less doing the same thing. I'm not necessarily operating on hope because I feel like there's no other choice. Like, this is the right thing to do, so we have to do it, whether we're hopeful or not. But it definitely helps. So and it's only recently that I've seen initiatives and really people waking up to this that makes me very hopeful that we actually might stand a chance.
I can answer first, so Sabine can give the last answer. What makes me hopeful is, and makes me feel energized, is the excitement among fellow young people and young scholars and young practitioners around the world who are just so passionate and excited and eager to learn more about planetary health and to apply the planetary health lens in addressing some of the world's seemingly insurmountable problems. In fact, right now, I'm getting already messages from some of the participants in this call now, and they're asking me questions and asking for appointments. So I'm just so thrilled, and I think we need to keep spreading this positive virus of planetary health to the next generation, who will be our tomorrow's leaders. Thanks.
Yeah, similar for me, actually. So I've been kind of driving towards doing this the whole time, but in the last 2 years, I noticed that we changed from being a minority that other people thought are crazy, to, including in my own family, in fact, towards like that becomes a mainstream. There's like thousands of people on the streets in Germany demanding this, and in academia it becomes, now there's a professorship for this, look at that, and so on. So like there's something moving now, and we know from the history that like things are not linear either. And next time we'll talk about social tipping points. So I'm feeling that maybe we're now at a stage in history where something can happen and we can change it, and even if the chances are not sure, like we have to grab that chance that is there and do our best to make it possible. And it depends on each person. It's like the hope is not like, oh, may it, it's like what we do, how do we organize ourselves. Also what Renzo said, like how do we become good advocates and learn story and science and solution talking, and become more effective, and also work with each other in a way that inspires us and gives us energy and like that we already live this sort of positive or more positive way of dealing with each other that we're wanting to see in the future. And that helps me a lot as well. Like all the people I've been working with in this area so far, they've been just wonderful, and you can like already feel how much better the world could be. And yeah, I think that gives me a lot of an energy, even though I'm not 100% sure we'll make it. Not at all. It looks grim right now, but it's possible, and possible is enough to keep working.
Thank you very much, Sabine. I want to actually give, I don't know, not like a homework, but I thought about a kind of homework all the people who are watching now could do, because I mean, you're all watching this webinar, and I think I would be really glad if for the next week you would choose two people to talk to. One, to think about a vision together, because I think we heard so much about inspiring each other and collaboration and what this kind of co-working can create, what kind of energy. So maybe each of you can think about one person he or she would like to talk during the next week about how would you like to look the world like in, I don't know, in 5 years, in 10 years, and just see what comes up and what kind of ideas and maybe even what kind of projects. And the other task is, which person did you never ever talk about climate change? Because there are studies who say when you talk to your relatives, for example, about climate change, they're more convinced that climate change is true and that they really need to do something than when they hear about it from politicians. So take the challenge and talk to someone about climate change you never ever talked to before. That's my homework.
You want to add something, Martin?
I wanted to share something very personal, which has to do with the hope question. Because it's a very special day for myself. Yesterday at 10:15 in the evening, my first granddaughter is born, Frida. And so if I look at her, and if I know, what happened in the last 9 months, and if I look at the pictures, it gives me hope. It gives me also dedication, and it gives me a reason for, while what we have in front of us is very challenging, it is possible, so it gives me a lot of hope that miracles are possible. So this work is also dedicated to Frida, that's her name. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Martin. Then I would say thank you for all the people who listened, for being here, and see you next time for, I already mentioned it, for transformation and social tipping points. And still you can invite other people, maybe the person you're talking to next week who you never ever talked before about climate change, and then enjoy the evening, I would say. And thank you. And thank you very much to the team as well. Now you know them a little bit better as well.